we're very excited to be getting some of his insight into a very beautiful, but I found extremely challenging book. The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. And I found this book particularly interesting to read during COVID-19, with a sense of how this generation, particularly of young people, are going to be so defined by this experience. And Prof. Marwala will explain more about the book and the protagonist in the book and the difficult decision that he has to make. And I think COVID-19 is raising difficult decisions for all of us, very often around money, an issue that is raised in this book. After Prof. Marwala has given us his ideas, there will be a chance for us to have a Q&A. And I'd really like to encourage everybody to please put your questions in the chat, and then I will ask Prof. Marwala your questions and we'll have a chance for discussion. So Prof. Marwala, over to you.
No, thank you very much, Maria, and all the people who have attended this forum. It is exciting. I believe that a nation that does not read shall die. So the book that I'm going to be reading today is The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. And by the way, the word beautiful in the title of the book is actually misspelled. And I will talk about what it means as we go on. In the next 3 readings, I'm going to read Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. And then I will read Purple, His Biscus by Chimamanda Adichie. By the way, when I was reading Purple, His Biscus, it was as if it was a follow-up to Chinua Achebe's book, because Chinua Achebe's book is about people trying to resist the presence of Europeans and the presence of Christianity in their religion, whereas Purple Hibiscus is when the religion is now embedded in the same part of Nigeria, and people now are much more dogmatic about the religion that they practice, quite opposed to what was in Things Fall Apart. And then after that, I'm going to go back to artificial intelligence, the future. So I will read Future Minds. I hope I can be able to do all of them. I would like to do all of them in July. Richard Young, and it will be telling us about the future. What is going to happen in the future? Because these books that I'm reading are about the past and the present, and then we'll talk about the future. So I really would like to contextualize The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born to June 16, 1976. We commemorated that on Tuesday, and I find it quite opportune that as we talk about the beautiful ones, we cannot do that without assessing our youth, because it's really the youth of this of any nation that are going to take our society forward. Now, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born was written by a fellow called Ayi Kwei Armah. He's from Ghana. And before I get into the book, I would like to talk a little bit about him. Ayi Kwei Armah was educated in a very prestigious school in the United States called Groton, a high school called Groton. And Groton is the high school that supplies talented young people to Ivy League universities. In fact, Theodore Roosevelt, one of the presidents of the United States, actually studied at Groton. very, very powerful people in America. And what is also coincidental, now that we are talking about June 1976, is that the current headmaster of Groton in Massachusetts is actually from South Africa and left South Africa as a victim of June 16, 1976. Mr. Themba Maqubela is now the principal of Groton School in Massachusetts. And then he went to an Ivy League university, Harvard University. Many people from Groton go to Harvard, to Ivy League universities. Again, this is a place where many presidents were educated there. We know George W. Bush was an MBA student there. We know Barack Obama was a law student at Harvard. So this is really a place of privilege. And then after that, he went to Columbia University, one of the 8 Ivy League universities in the United States, Columbia, Cornell, Princeton, Yale, Harvard, Pennsylvania, Dartmouth. So he went there to do a master's degree. Again, Columbia, we know President Barack Obama was also there. Roosevelt was also there. So it also is a place of privilege. Then he came back to Africa with all this privileged education, obviously full of dreams and higher expectations of what Africa could be at that time. So, in fact, the beautiful ones are not yet born. In fact, the writings of Ayi Kwei Armah was so problematic to Chinua Achebe that Chinua Achebe even accused him of being an alienated native, somebody who cannot make sense of his place of birth. His expectations are not in line with what is there. So this is the history of Armah. So he writes this book, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. And I really need to talk about this concept of the beautiful ones. Who are the beautiful ones? Now, when I was thinking about this, it came to me quite, quite clearly that he is obviously not talking about the physical beauty when he talks about the beautiful one. I think he's talking about those people with virtue who represent the best in our society, the most educated, and the most patriotic. That's really what he represents by the word the beautiful ones. I also wanted to link this concept of the beautiful ones to ancient Egypt. During the time of Nefertiti, more than 2,000 years ago. By the way, Nefertiti actually means the beautiful one has come. That's what it means. 2,000 years ago, in the continent of Africa, a princess was born, and she was named the beautiful one has come, Nefertiti. And 2,000 years later, Ayi is writing about the fact that the beautiful ones are not yet born. So that is actually quite ironic. So now, the protagonist of this story is a nameless person. This is actually quite interesting. Nameless. His name is he's just referred to as the man in the book. The man was a clerk in a railway station, and used to have a wife. The wife was Oyo. Oyo had dreams. She wanted more than what he could offer. And she was willing to compromise her values in order to get that which she will be able to satisfy, especially her physical needs as well as her standing in society. And then she had a mother-in-law of the man who also wanted the best. She did not quite like the man because he was saying that this man is not doing enough for the children. There is a story when the man took the children home to their mother-in-law, and the mother-in-law was saying, you know, come and eat. You probably are starving at your home. Again, she did not quite like certainly his character, which I will talk about. So this man was living in an environment where corruption was everywhere. It was during the time of Kwame Nkrumah. In fact, it is the period from the Passion Week in 1965 to about the 28th of February 1966, which was the day in which Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown. So at this point in Ghana, Kwame was a man of many ideas, but he was so consumed in his ideas that he could not get enough time to build a society, at least, that was free of corruption, that worked for all its citizens. So this book is set within that short period of time that led to the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah. So this man, he works in the office, he sees people participating in corruption, but he does not participate in corruption. In fact, he does not even attempt in many instances to discourage people around him to participate in corruption. An example of the story that is told in the book is a man who comes to the office and talked to the man and said, please, can you arrange that my logs as the ones that you get from the tree, be picked up because they will start rotting. And the man, realizing that this is actually a request for participation in corruption, refuses. And then a few days later, the same man comes to get the same thing, but from somebody else, but from his office mate. But he does not discourage his office mate. He just let it go. So this man had a friend. His friend is just called the teacher. This teacher was so alienated from what is happening in Ghana at the time that he had gone to self-isolation, living alone, almost always naked all the time. And it's quite ironic that he's called the teacher, because this particular teacher had no students. In fact, he had almost no friends except the man. And the man himself also, it is ironic with the names here, it's almost like allegory, because he was not the man of the people. He was not the people's man. He was just called the man. And then this man had a classmate. His classmate was Joseph Kukumson. Joseph was in the heart of the government of Kwame Nkrumah at the time. He was a minister in the government. And he was getting all the finer things in life, which Oyo, the man's wife, and the man's mother-in-law really admired this Joseph Kumson. In fact, there is a statement that is narrated in the book where the mother-in-law says, this Joseph has really done well for his family. He had a driver, he had a nice Mercedes-Benz, and he was living in a flashy house. He was the classmate, high school classmate of the man. In fact, the man was saying that this man, Joseph, was not even smart when they were in high school. And it is quite clear that he rose, according to the book, to the top of the political echelons by reciting slogans that he himself did not believe in, because it was the means to an end for him, the means to a better life, the means to access to power and having power. So at one stage, Joseph Kumsun, the minister, meets the man and tells him that I would like to come and visit you at your house, and then he was going to come with his wife, Estelle Compson, and then he did actually come, and it was clear that that was a different world in which he was not used to. For example, there is an example in the book where Minister Compson wanted to go to the bathroom, but when he was taken there and he saw the state of the bathroom, he decided not to use it. And again, if you look at the book itself, there is an element of filth anywhere, which is really an allegory of a society that was decaying at that particular point in time. So they came. Joseph comes with his wife Estelle to the man's house. Of course, oil left nothing to chance. Wanted to impress the minister and his wife. They even had beer, and there is a scene there where Estelle says, "But this is a local beer. We don't drink local beer. We drink imported beer." And of course, this is actually again an indication of people aspiring for things that are not even produced in their own countries, and not focusing on how do we make sure that we are able to produce those goods within our own country that we are importing from abroad. And then at that dinner, it was agreed that the minister is going to get a boat for the man's wife, Oyo. And this boat is going to be used for fishing. It's not a cheap boat, it's a very expensive boat. And then profits are going to flow. And then all of them, their lives are going to be improved. And the minister said, no, the reason why I'm doing this is because as a minister, I cannot have an asset such as a boat in my own name. The government policy will not allow me to have things in my own name. In fact, it will not even allow me to have things in the name of somebody who is closely associated with me, like his wife Estelle. So this was another way of basically getting an asset, and in this case, a boat, in another person's name, so that it could not be detected. And then they decided, they agreed that, in fact, it was not to Estelle. Originally, the mother-in-law of the man was the one who was going to be used as the owner of the boat. And later on, the minister invite the man and the wife to come and visit their family in the presidential compound, the ministerial compound. And it was going to be the time in which that deal that they had agreed on was going to be sealed. For one reason or another, the mother-in-law did not show up. So it was just the man and Oyo. And Oyo did not say, let us reschedule this transaction. She decided that she was going to sign for this boat. Ironically, the name that was inscribed in this boat was called Princess. And Princess was the name of the daughter of the minister. So this is basically what happened. And then ultimately, the ownership of the boat was given to Estelle, the wife, Oyo, the wife of the man. But it is actually quite, again, it represented the contradiction of the man. He is there when these corrupt activities are happening. He does not even attempt to stop them. He allows these activities to go on. So this is now the Oyo was the owner of this boat. But of course, that deal did not go as anticipated. The profits nor the fish did not flow to Oyo. They went to the minister. And Oyo and the mother-in-law were very, very disappointed. And then fast forward, then comes a period when Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown. Now, Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown when he went to China. He went to China in order to resolve the issues around the Vietnam War that was raging at the time in the 60s. In fact, there is this graphic picture of Kwame Nkrumah sitting down with his head bowed down and his hands in his head, having just learned that he is no longer the minister, the prime minister or the president of Ghana. I have to also add that after that episode of coups in Africa, in our continent, presidents before the blocs, whether it is SADC or ECOWAS, decided that if there is a coup in one of the countries, the region will interfere. Before that agreement, many of our leaders in the African continent, whenever they traveled abroad, they used to go with all their top generals, their minister of defense, so that the tragedy that had befallen Kwame Nkrumah does not befall them at that time. So there was a coup, and the minister obviously was going to be the target, and he runs, and he comes to the house of the man in Oyo. He was absolutely terrified. Every time he had a car passing by, he was trembling. And then finally they decide that he will have to escape to Ivory Coast, Abidjan, and he's going to go using the boat that was in Oyo's name. That is the irony of the story. And ultimately, the man accompanied him there, and then the minister ultimately left alone, leaving his family and wife in Ghana. So this is actually the story. And of course, it is a story of Ghana, but it is also a contemporary story. If you think about all these things about asset swaps in order to hide the identity of the people who are benefiting from it, it's almost like a story that can often be told now. And if I were to analyze some of these people that are mentioned in the story, because of the background that people Ayi was trying to paint. For example, there is a lady called Sister Manan, who was disappointed by her politician boyfriend and slipped into the margins of society, smoking marijuana all the time. And then there was another man called Kofi Billy, who was injured by a tractor that was being driven by one of the British men, and he ultimately commits suicide. So it paints a picture of everything in decay. People being thrust into margins of society. People being confused about their identities, whether it is the man to participate or not to participate. Some people will say that when you observe an ill being committed and do nothing about it, you have committed that ill. And you look at teacher. So it's actually quite a rich story that actually can be able to be related to our contemporary story. Of course, this what I've given you is a simplistic analysis of the book, and it is a fiction. But fiction often provides an avenue to dissect and reflect on a community. Just as Chinua Achebe in Things Fall Apart, which I'm going to read, it paints a picture and dissect a picture of a community at that time. Or Ngugiwa Thiong'o, in A Grain of Wheat, a book that I read when I was still in high school. Or Zakes Mda, now in The Ways of Dying. All these show us that fiction makes us examine society. Now, what does this story teach us? Firstly, it teaches us about a decaying post-colonial Ghanaian society that was collapsing under the weight of corruption. In fact, it was decaying because of the internal flaws that existed in that country. The Irish poet W.B. Yeats once contended that civilizations collapse because of two reasons: either because of external forces or internal weaknesses. I think society can collapse also by the combination of the two. We can examine the Roman Empire and how it collapsed because mainly of its internal weaknesses and ultimately because of the invasion by the barbarians from outside, the so-called barbarians at the time. Or if you examine the Egyptian society, it collapsed because of strong external forces that came and overwhelmed it. Now that we are where we are as a society, will our society crumble because of our internal weaknesses or because of the pressures from the outside? Does South Africa have a critical mass of the beautiful ones to prevent it from collapsing because of internal contradictions? These are the questions that we need to answer. When we as individuals, we are driving and then a cop stops us and asks us for a driver's license and it has expired. and we take out a 100 rand note, then we are contributing towards the collapse of our society. We are contributing towards the building of that internal contradiction that will ultimately lead to the collapse of our society. And of course, people will say, but no, 100 rands note is not too much money. I'm reminded of what is written in the Christian Bible. I know quite a bit about the Christian Bible, even though I am not a religious person. And I quote, "He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much." Close quote. South Africa needs the beautiful ones who will be able to deal with all internal contradictions, whether they are at the highest level or at the lowest level. If I were to quote the Chinese president Xi Jinping, he calls it resolving the contradictions at the flies level as well as at the tigers level. If we are able to do this, we are going to liberate our means of production, the forces of production, and be able to build a strong economy. Of course, we live in the COVID world. The COVID world is another external contradiction that we need to contend with. How do we cultivate the beautiful ones so that we have enough people who will be able to deal with complicated issues such as the COVID-19 that will ultimately collapse society. Countries are going to collapse because of COVID-19. Of course, I also said the beautiful ones must be educated. They must be able to read and write. Because if we do not have people who can read and write, there's no way we are going to build a society that will have enough people with sufficient mental stamina to be able to deal decisively with the problems that confront us. If we look at the statistics, for example, in 2018, Statistics South Africa found that more than 3 million South Africans are illiterate, meaning they cannot read and write in at least one language. Of course, we have about 60 million people. Of course, people will say, but it's only 5% of our population. But we need to move our people forward. They need to learn how to read and write so that we can build this economy. More devastating than this is that the Progress in International Reading Literacy Study, which assesses children's reading comprehension, has placed South African children last in 50 countries. We obviously need the beautiful ones who will work hard as students, as teachers, and administrators, including vice chancellors, to usher an education system that will inculcate skills such as communication, mathematical thinking, logical thinking, numeracy skills that are required for our people to be able to tackle the problems that confront us today. The changes that are being brought about by the COVID-19 and the fourth industrial revolution. Of course, for us to be able to achieve this, we have to invest in our youth. Our youth must be impacted. As Vice Chancellor, I must confess, sometimes I do feel like many of our students have never had the privilege of having a parental guidance that basically says no and yes. Because if there are no yes, no's, if there are no no's and yeses, then how do you inculcate discipline? You can't read a book unless you are disciplined. You can't study mathematics unless you are disciplined. Now, coming to the conclusion of my talk, we're also living in an era where the movement, the Black Lives Matter, is also changing the world. We have seen this movement accelerate in recent weeks, driven by social media, driven by a need for a change, driven by the youth. I think it is an indication of a people and a community that is frustrated by the changes that are happening all around us, and we do not know how to handle them. So in a sense, the beautiful ones are not yet born. It's a homage to this power, to this drive for the change. Finally, I'm going to end by quoting Armah, the author of this book. "Alone I am nothing," he says. "I have nothing if I am alone." We as a people have power, but we will never know it. We will never see it work unless we come together to make it work. Close quote. I hope we live in the hope that the beautiful ones that are not yet born at the scale at which we want them to be born so that our society can change, that we are able to get more and more beautiful ones emerging in all sectors of our community to take our society to a higher level. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Marwala. You've left us with lots of interesting things to think about. A lot of people have been commenting about the cycles of revolution. For example, 1976, and then fees must fall, and how that resonates with the book. Other people have commented on the VBS saga that we're busy going through at the moment and the resonance with the beautiful ones. One of the questions that I think is really a question that we can spend a bit more time with is from someone who asks, can we conclude that the themes of this book, or that the theme of this book is salvation, since it's about a man's soul and by extension a nation's? And I wonder if you'd like to comment a little bit more on that, idea of the theme of salvation.
Absolutely. I mean, this is really the theme of the book, because during this time, when he was seeing all these activities that he did not want to participate in it happening, there was an element of me that thought he was not sure whether he was doing the right thing. For example, you know, when he's invited to go to the minister's house, he goes there and he enjoys himself. You know, and it's only when the same minister who was demonstrating so much power was ultimately running away for his life that even his wife was proud of him and saying that, you see, at least you know, the character that he had assumed, even though he did not really know why he was assuming that character, all along was actually the correct one.
Thank you. And then Namanis asks, are the beautiful ones coming at a rate that can be seen, or is there much to be done towards cultivating them?
There is absolutely much to be done about cultivating them. As long as you have mud schools with teachers coming to school drunk, many of our teachers not coming to school on Mondays because of what is termed babalas. I forgot what it is called in English, hangover. You know?
Hangover, yeah.
As long as there are potholes in our roads, while we know that billions of money have been spent in constructing and maintaining that road, is always a sign that we have not yet sufficiently cultivated the beautiful world. Now, maybe let me just give a story about how this title actually emerged. As he was walking away from the sea after having taken the minister to the boat to flee to Ivory Coast, he comes to a roadblock. And in this roadblock, there was a truck that was pulling off. And at the back of the truck, there was an expression, "The beautiful ones are not yet born," with beautiful not spelled correctly.
For anybody who's been to Ghana, you see so many of these signs all around Ghana. And nowadays, with the rise of Pentecostal charismatic Christianity, there are, God's blessed truck. Same sort of theme. One of the other questions is, with the list of books that you have given, Prof. Marwala, are you going to choose something by Frantz Fanon?
I must confess that is something that was on my blind spot. I must confess I have not really read him, so I will be very, very happy to. In fact, let me make a pledge that in August I will have a Frantz Fanon book.
Oh, wonderful.
I was when I was a PhD student at the University of Cambridge. Professor Sipamandla Zondi, who is at the University of Pretoria and is actually moving to University of Johannesburg, used to organize a reading club where we discuss books. And one of the books that we discussed was The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. I must confess, when I went to the reading club, I had not read the book. And I'm sure there are many of you here who are here but have not read the book. But I am going to read the book and I will discuss it in August. And what I like about Frantz Fanon is because he comes from a scientific base. He was a psychiatrist. So there is a certain level of precision that he obviously brings in describing things that are not necessarily precise.
Another question is, could you elaborate a little bit more about the relevance of the book and contemporary South African politics, other than the roadblocks? What is it that he finds, you, Prof. Marwala, find disturbing, and what is it that can be done?
No, I think it is clear that this book, if we had changed names, Ayo to Temba or Tshilidzi, the man to, it could have been a contemporary South African story if you take away the coups, because I don't think South Africa will ever have a coup. Certainly not a military coup. But certainly the elements of decay, you can see it. We at the University of Johannesburg have a campus in downtown. And you can't walk downtown and not see decay. You can see that there is an element of neglect going on, almost similar to the neglect that was being described in the book. Because he goes graphically about how dirty the place was, Armah, in his book. The issues of corruption, people have been arrested. By the way, I know many of those people. Not knowing them because they're my friends, but because these are people in our community, in my community where I come from, where I grew up. I would say one of, in fact, I think two of them were in school with me. I think one of the guy who got 350 million rands was in school with me.
Right, so the next question is, I appreciate, Prof. Marwala, how you spoke about mentorship and passing the baton on. However, can we talk in a little bit more depth about the kind of environment that creates the uprise of the beautiful ones in terms of intersectional aspects that perpetuate inequalities? I mean, how will beauty emerge given the rate of femicide in South Africa? How about issues around decoloniality in general? Things look so gloomy and overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, a complex society will be overwhelming, but we can't give up. We can't give up. We absolutely cannot give up. African nation states are very, very young. They are very, very young. And we know historically how difficult it is to build society. You just look at the wars that happened in Europe. You look at the civil wars that happened in Asia. So we can't give up. It's going to require lots of effort. But it starts with all of us. If all of us do the right thing, then the people who interact with us are ultimately going to do the right thing. And ultimately, we'll have a society that we are all proud of. It probably might not be attainable in my lifetime. It's probably a generational matter, you know. But nonetheless, the exciting part of it is that we can actually be the beautiful ones that are building the bedrock of that society that will emerge ultimately.
And another question that a couple of people are encouraging us to ask is, how do we cultivate beautiful ones if the leaders, the people holding positions of power and influence, are the ones who are at the center of doing things wrong? I'm saying this because the young or the youth usually copy and imitate the older ones that influence them.
I think we have a very wrong way of characterizing leaders. We tend to think that leaders are people who hold political offices or who hold fancy titles. I think societies that work are societies that have lots of people who acknowledge themselves as leaders. If you are a teacher, you are a very important leader. Can you imagine how many people pass through you? I mean, when I go to my high school, I still see a teacher who taught me 30 years ago. I just imagine how many people did this person influence, and they go and influence other people. So leadership is actually much more than politics. We have religious leaders. We have leaders who are teachers are by nature leaders. We have community leaders. We have youth leaders. All of us must actually take responsibility, because leadership that is going to lead to the creation of the beautiful ones will only be effective if almost all of us see ourselves as leaders. In our homes, with our children, we are leaders in our homes. We have to plan the activities of our children. We have to make resources available for them to be able to go to school. We have to motivate them to work hard. All attributes that if you go to any leadership course, they will tell you these are the attributes of leadership.
How do you transform the racists in South Africa and in the whole world to be the beautiful ones? Racism is getting worse in South Africa.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't claim to be an expert, but I would imagine that, things as complex as racism will ultimately be a multi-generational matter. It will be something that we absolutely will have to be working very hard at it, maybe for the next 100 years. But what we need to do, firstly, we need to be intolerant in all our spheres of influence when it manifests itself. I think that is the first thing. We need to actively discourage it. We need to actively encourage people to behave in a way that is just, that respect other people's dignity. I guess I'm calling for the concept of carrot and a stick. But ultimately, we will have to be patient. It has to also be embedded in our schooling system. What are we teaching in our schooling systems? Is it reflected in our curriculum? All these issues are going to be necessary for us to be able to defeat racism.
And then to move to a more positive note, a couple of people are saying, Prof, thank you so much for encouraging us. I feel empowered after this session, Prof Marwala. Yes, things are looking bad, but we can't give up. Imagine what would have happened to us if the youth of 76 gave up. We owe it to the next generation to keep fighting for what is right, individually and collectively. Is there something you'd like to add to that?
No, absolutely. I mean, the youth of 76 are probably one of the most inspiring youth, certainly in the last 100 years. And they were leaders. I mean, I was just talking about the headmaster of Groton in Massachusetts. You look at all aspects of our lives, the people who emerged from that moment when young people question things. The former CEO of the Mandela Children's Fund, Mrs. Swongile Mkabela. All these leaders emerged because of from that 76 generation. And I think the youth of today will do themselves good if they actually study those events. I think studying is very, very important. Reading about them, reflecting about them, and what were the strengths, what were the weaknesses, and what do we learn and what we do.
Prof Marwala, thank you so much. Lots of people have been commenting and thanking you for sharing your wisdom and your insight. Once again, this reading group has helped us to see the world more broadly, helped us to think about the world that we're living in, and I think given us all some hope for how to cope with the difficulties of the age that we are living in and all the challenges that it's raising for us. And we really look forward to the next session with you and this very exciting list of books that you're going to be reading with us. So the next book is going to be Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. And we'll keep you all informed and we look forward to seeing you there.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.